Welcome to Epicenter. I'm Fahad Hussain. Zunaira Azhar is on leave. Today we have a packed program because there is so much happening in Pakistan. In fact, this whole week has been very news heavy. And there's been a mix of topics, themes, ranging from the political to the quasi-political. For example, of course, the main news doing the rounds for the last couple of days is the weed scandal and how it's slowly not only growing in size but also in intensity and raising some very fundamental questions about how decisions were made in the caretaker government, and perhaps equally importantly what the present government is going to do in order to figure out what actually happened, who's responsible, and what action to take against those who are actually found responsible. This is a tricky question, so we are going to talk a bit about it with our guests. There's also been this very important and very significant discussion on the possibility of increasing the tenure of judges in the Supreme Court. And because it applies, if it were to go ahead, that would mean that every Chief Justice would have a tenure of 3 years. And that would have far-reaching consequences in so many ways. Is that something which is doable, which is practical, which is about to happen? We are going to talk a bit about that. And then, of course, the ongoing issue of the dialogue between PTI and the establishment, or talks of a dialogue or a dialogue about a dialogue. Is it actually happening? And after the publication of an article by Mr. Imran Khan in the UK paper, The Telegraph, is there anything left in the dialogue? So we're going to talk about that. And then later in the program, this new digital agency, cyber crime agency, government has just announced it's come as a bolt out of the blue. A lot of people are surprised. Why is there a need for this? And does it actually mean that the government is now slowly tightening the screws on not just digital media, but freedom of expression? So all of these things, a very packed program, much to talk about, interesting guests. We'll start with the first segment and try and figure out what's happening with the weed scandal. Two very learned and very in the know guests are joining me today from the PTI, Mr. Taimur Salim Jhagra, former finance minister of KP, and is one of those people who are equally at ease talking about political and economic issues. And from the PMLN, we are joined by Rana Ehsan Afzal, who has come up very rapidly amongst the PMLN ranks, is now one of the most articulate spokesmen for the party. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining me. Let me start with Taimur Jhagra Saab. Weed scandal. Of course, the PTI feels that it is a God-sent scandal. It is something which is now growing in size. It doesn't seem to be subsiding at all. The current, Taimur Saab, just to quickly bring you up to date, the situation today is that the Kisan Ittihad has actually announced that they are going to launch a protest movement from May the 10th. From Multan, they are going to converge onto Lahore. They're going to they say that this protest movement is going to spread across the rest of the country, and they will not stop till their demands are met, because they are facing unbelievable kind of economic pressures. So how do you look into this, Taimur Saab? What actually happened in your opinion?
So we don't certainly look at it as a godsend. It is unfortunate. It is exceptionally unfortunate. And I think it proves 3 or 4 things. You know, the caretaker government that was brought in to show that technocrat governments work and can decide differently. And I think that myth is out of the window. I think it certainly shows the ineptitude of this government, in the sense in particular that what we have maintained continuously, that a government that doesn't have a mandate will not be able to take difficult decisions of any sort. And that is true. We certainly saw it here when they were thrashing the farmers. They're unable to procure the wheat. And they're going to launch some form of inquiry blaming the caretaker government, and we know where all of this will head, precisely nowhere. I heard Musaddiq Malik, who I think is one of the more knowledgeable government ministers, at least as far as knowledge of economics is concerned, to say this entire wheat procurement system where prices are set and then there is either a deficit or a surge and an export and then a shortage, that this is wrong and we should get out from it. Absolutely. I agree, but Musaddiq Saab, who are you telling? You're in government. If you believe this is the right thing, do it. It can't be done in 1 year, but you can certainly articulate a roadmap. And I think what should absolutely be done in the short term, given that we have this system that I actually don't agree with. In principle, I agree with what Musaddiq said. But in the short term, the government has set these support prices. The farmers make their growing decisions on this. Go ahead and procure the wheat and, maintain a strategic reserve, and for a year or more, hand out some subsidized wheat. You've caused the highest inflation in the history of the country. So at least, have the aptitude to solve these immediate crises as they come. The last thing I'll just say, Fahad, is that every crisis like this, all it proves is that until we get to political normalcy, and that requires all political actors, starting with Imran Khan, to be out in the political battlefield and not in jail, we will stumble from crisis to crisis, and the elusive goal of political and economic stability will.
So basically what has happened is, for all those who haven't really followed up on this scandal, before I go to Rana Ehsan Afzal, basically the caretaker government ordered wheat to be imported. Their calculation was, as we've heard, their version from the caretaker prime minister, former caretaker prime minister, that their version is that they felt at that time that they needed to import wheat because the stocks weren't enough. The whole process went through the procedures, the ECC, the required approvals. Everything was done as is done in the government. The order was placed, and then we've had a bumper crop. So now there's actually an excess of wheat. The large amount of wheat which was bought by the caretakers, and now a bumper crop. So because of the excess supply of wheat available, the government cannot buy or purchase wheat from the farmers. So the farmers are now being forced to sell their wheat at throwaway prices, which is directly impacting them. The Prime Minister has ordered an inquiry under the Cabinet Secretary. That inquiry is underway. We have to wait to see who they hold responsible, but obviously the fingers are being pointed at the caretaker government. Now, Rana Ehsan Saab, you've heard what Taimur Jhagra Saab was saying. Clearly, if you look at the way that this crisis is unfolding, it's become a major challenge for the government for two reasons. One, of course, the government has to, if it doesn't purchase the wheat from the farmers, then it has to face the protest which has already been announced, and which is why Mr. Nawaz Sharif is also taking personal interest in this. The other, of course, is holding people to account. And the caretaker government is on good terms with the present government. So it's not going to be easy to hold somebody very senior accountable in the caretaker government. So now Rana Ehsan Saab, how do you get out of this really tough spot?
So the federal government has started procuring wheat, and PASCO, I think, the initial target was 1.4 million tons of wheat procurement for this year. And usually when you see the historic trend, PASCO doesn't procure as much as the target, and they usually go 60-70% of the target. So currently, PASCO has procured almost 95% of the initial target, which was 1.4 million tons of wheat. And we have, the federal government has enhanced the target from 1.4 million tons to 1.8 million tons of, so that's a 400,000 tons additional wheat procurement, which is going to be a record in the recent history for PASCO to procure so much wheat. Secondly, the Bardana bags, there were news that they were being sold at a premium. There's going to be a zero tolerance on that. And PASCO has been linked with the local governments, the ACs, DCs, to ensure that such trends are not again witnessed by anyone. And we ensure that Bardana bags are distributed freely and there's no premium being charged on top of that.
How is it possible for the government to purchase all the wheat that the farmers are holding on to, because that would mean excess of wheat, and either it would mean oversupply of wheat, or it's going to mean the government spending twice the amount that it should have on purchasing wheat.
So let me come to that. Yes, the caretaker government gave permission for import of wheat to the private sector, which is not the usual practice. And the government, the TCP was also about to procure, but TCP, gladly was stopped from procuring wheat. They were going to procure 1 million tons of wheat. But the private sector, which was supposed to procure 2.5 million tons of wheat, which would have been the right number, they went beyond that number and they procured 3.6 million tons of wheat. So that's an additional 1.1 million ton, which shouldn't have been imported. So that is being investigated, that why it happened, why DPP, the Department of Plant Protection, didn't stop, why the Ministry of Food Security didn't intervene, and what the loopholes. So that's one thing. But right now we must understand, which is very important, is that the wheat has been cut and 90% of the wheat has been sold by the farmers already. Whether the wheat has been procured by some stockists, some hoarders, that's another story.
But if that were the case, then why would the farmers announce a countrywide protest starting from 10th of May?
So this is the most important point, that farmers have sold the wheat, even if it is at a lower price, which is very sad, shouldn't have happened, but it is 90% of it is done. Now this demand that, there are going to be countrywide protests and whatnot, is basically, we feel that now the people who have bought that wheat, they want to sell it at the premium. So that's another story, which we need to have a close eye on. So I just wanted to make that point.
It's going to be a very difficult situation when you have such a large number of people, farmers converging onto Lahore, and they've already, I think they've mentioned somewhere that the farmers' protest in India has set some sort of a precedent, and it makes for media hype, and it creates a lot of pressure on the government either way.
Fahad, you can check it. The 90% of the farmers have sold their wheat. Now, it is, but the challenge for the government is, what is the challenge for the government? On one side, 25 to 50 million people, they are procuring flour at lower rates, and the 10 kg rate of flour has dropped down. But on the meanwhile, we have to balance that the losses of the farmers are somehow, they don't suffer bigger losses.
Okay, we have to move on. Okay, we have to move on, but I think the key question, Taimur Saab, would be how the investigation or the inquiry that is taking place, what it concludes, because obviously the decision was made at the highest level of the government through the ECC and a final approval by the Prime Minister. So the inquiry committee will have to point the fingers at people at very, very high levels, and that's going to create tremendous problems for the government. I don't know how they're going to get out of this. Quick answer, very brief, because then I want to move on. Taimur Saab.
Very briefly, don't hold your breath on any inquiry. Judge the government on what is the way forward they find, both on the wheat procurement and the long-term solution. And I think on all three counts, you won't find any encouraging answers.
Okay, let's move on. Of course, this wheat scandal issue is unfolding. It continues to unfold. And I think this is the first real challenge for the government, and it's going to be very, very important at this early stage how they deal with it, both in terms of holding people account and also dealing with the farmers. It's a politically sensitive issue, and primarily in the province of Punjab. So there's a double whammy for the government. Let's move on. Extending the tenure of judges. Now this is a proposal which is now slowly gaining traction. The recently appointed advisor to the Prime Minister, Rana Sanaullah, the former Interior Minister, was quoted as saying in a TV show yesterday that this is something that should happen and that the Chief Justice should have a tenure. I know that the government hasn't properly announced it, but Rana Ehsan, how serious is this proposal? Because even the Law Minister has hinted at it, and should we expect some concrete, substantive progress update on that in the next couple of days?
So what Rana Sanaullah Saab said yesterday was his opinion. And many people have this opinion that a Chief Justice should not be there for 3 months or a year or 1.5 years. Rather, he should have a tenure. But Asim Nazir Tarar Saab, who is the current Law Minister, he explained in detail that as of now, there is no proper, task that has been assigned to work on this or draft this law. And there is no work which is being done currently on an official level that we are moving towards that direction, number one. Number two, if that, happens, it's not going to happen in isolation. It's going to be a discussion in the parliament. It will require a constitutional amendment. It will require a 2/3 majority. So all this, news that something is about to happen or the government is doing something on it, that is not true. But the truth is that yes, there is a lot of people within our party
who feel that way. But the issue, Taimur Saab, is this: if such a discussion were to happen at any given point where it was not seen in a political context, then obviously any such proposal can be discussed, and if the pros outweigh the cons, and a majority of the parliament think that this is the right way to go, then really there is no issue with it. But the problem right now, the criticism that we are hearing, is that it appears to be person specific, because it's going to benefit the current Chief Justice and it's going to knock out one or two other people. What is your position on this?
You're absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. Unfortunately, many such amendments in history in Pakistan have been person and politics specific. And I think anything like this, given the nature of, let me use my words carefully, controversial decisions coming from the higher courts, including from the Chief Justice, right, will mean that this will only add to the political instability, the political polarization, and I don't know why anyone would do that. You want to increase the tenure, debate it and do it, but make it operational post the tenure of this Chief Justice, because the rules should not change in the middle of his tenure for him. That should be absolutely unacceptable.
Quick answer, quick rebuttal, Rana Ehsan Saab. That's a fair point. A law should never be seen as being person-specific. Of course, the argument would be that whenever the law is legislated, it will benefit somebody. So there is a counter-argument for it. But would it be better to wait, let the present incumbent retire, and then move on to such legislation? Quick answer.
That is dependent on the 2/3 members of the parliament. If they feel that way, of course, it's going to happen like that. If they feel otherwise, it will happen otherwise. So it's not something, this cannot happen by an individual or a bunch of parliamentarians. It's going to be a collective wisdom whenever it happens. So that should be the peace of mind to all conspirators or, conspiracy theorists that something is about to happen. It is going to happen with a majority.
Okay, all right. We have a couple of minutes left. I want to quickly touch upon the prospects of a PTI establishment dialogue, or the lack of it. And there's been a constant back and forth in terms of whether such a dialogue is happening. The PTI has constantly been saying that it would want to have a dialogue, and that dialogue will not happen with the political parties, and in fact should happen with the establishment, which in itself actually has a lot of problems. But despite all of that, an article published by Mr. Imran Khan in the Daily Telegraph, I think pretty much settles the whole issue. And I'll put it in front of Taimur Jagda Saab. I'm sure you've also read the article. He says in his second paragraph, Mr. Khan, since the military establishment under direct guidance of General Asim Munir has tried every tactic to decimate my party's presence from the political environment, and then he goes on to blame the army, the establishment directly for very serious charges. Taimur Saab, I think if ever there was any prospect of a dialogue, I think it's dead after this article. Why? Was there a need to write this?
Look, I don't know why there was or wasn't a need specifically to write this, but I think we can ask many whys on a lot of what has happened over the last 2 years. I will just pose the question, is it or isn't it true that the biggest role in power over the last 2 years, and in particular since the turn of the government, has been in the hands of non-political forces? Is that correct or not?
I think that's a fair assessment.
And if that's true, then I think that whether you call this a tactical mistake or not, I don't think it is saying in the context of a crisis that seems to be partially personal. Right? These crises should never get personal. And that's why I think it's important that we remember the maxim that says that you can always start a crisis, but you never know how it will end. And that, I think, is what we are facing since April 9th. And the honest but difficult path forward is to find a way forward where, first of all, political forces, Imran Khan has not stopped anyone from talking to political forces.
Okay.
But secondly, all the other institutions with a stake in the country's future that are de facto part of the decision-making framework agree on some sort of route forward.
Okay, Rana Hassan Saab, on that point, very briefly, Mr. Imran Khan also writes, and I quote, "The democratic revenge by the people of Pakistan against the agenda of the military establishment not only was a national defiance by the people, but also a complete rejection of the state narrative of May 9th, when PTI supporters," and I emphasize here, he says, "when PTI supporters were falsely accused as a pretext for a crackdown of attacking military installations." So, Hassan Saab, PTI and its chairman are still not accepting that they were responsible for May 9. It is, a complete state of denial. After that, what are the chances that there could be any basis for a dialogue?
Well, there's a problem with PTI. They cannot have a dialogue with anyone. That was their statement, that we are only going to have a dialogue. I'm going to talk. They're only going to have a dialogue with the military and its chief or the ISI in the PDM government. And you know where that ended. The dialogue ended on red line, which was Imran Khan being crossed. And these guys, they took the dialogue to 10 military establishments in 10 various cities. And that is the dialogue, how it ended on the 9th May. Another point I would like to make is that when they were in government in 2018, and we wanted to have a dialogue, whether it was Charter of Economy, it was COVID, or the national security meetings where the Prime Minister would not want to come because he would want to avoid the opposition leader. They didn't want to have a dialogue then, neither with the opposition, neither with the coalition partners. It was us, the opposition, that was interested in all these things, but the PM was missing. And we had those issues on the elections 2018, similar sort of issues that are being raised by PTI. We thought their mandate was not correct and whatnot, but we wanted the dialogue. Today, even if PTI is raising these issues, like you've just mentioned, what Khan Saab said about this election, they don't want a dialogue with the political side. They still want a dialogue with the military side. So, the problem is that they never want a dialogue. And another problem that PTI has is that on each and every issue, there are 10 different stances. So we don't know which one to trust or which one to accept, because, Khan would make a committee for a dialogue, but Khan would write this article, which is, a U-turn of what that committee was.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. But if PTI actually wants a dialogue with the establishment, writing something like this has to be one of the most unproductive ways of actually moving ahead with it. I'm thankful to both my for joining me today on this segment. We are going to take a break. But when we come back, this new digital cybercrime authority agency the government has recently announced, what was the need? And are we under serious threat of further curbs on not just social media, but also freedom of expression? Two very relevant, pertinent, and qualified guests are joining us after this short break, so do stay with us. Welcome back after the break. Now, another very important topic, which is slightly concerning also. The government has announced the formation of a new cyber crime agency by the name of National Cyber Crimes Investigation Agency, NCCIA. Now, the cyber crimes unit was housed in the FIA. So FIA was in fact the place where all cybercrime issues were being dealt with. Now, this new agency, means that it is a separate authority. It will work under the Interior Ministry. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the work that was being done by FIA. Will there be duplication, or is this a completely new setup? So that's point number one. Point number two is that all of this has come as a complete surprise. All the key stakeholders, whether they are media organizations or digital organizations or digital activists and all the other concerned people, they were not consulted, which is strange because previously whenever issues or legislation related to digital initiatives or cyber issues was contemplated, there was a lot of discussion, debate, consultation with stakeholders. They weren't always heard properly. Their point of view wasn't always incorporated in the final outcome, but they were at least consulted. This time around, it has come as a bit of a surprise. So obviously, questions are being asked. What's going on? Why was there a need for such an agency? And does it mean that there could be greater pressures on social media, on the digital landscape, and overall on the freedom of expression? These are very, very relevant issues, which is why we've invited two very senior people who have been involved in all of this and whose opinion carries a lot of weight. Nigat Dad is my first guest. She is a digital rights activist, very well known, has done a lot of work in this field and has had a lot of impact in terms of how government deals with this new digital world. And Zarar Khoro, my colleague from Dawn, who's been writing about these issues, also talking about these in his TV program. Thank you both. And shortly, another colleague of mine will also join. I will introduce him when he joins with us. Thank you both for joining us. Nigat, let me start with you. Were you taken by surprise, or was there any indication that something like this was cooking?
Of course, many of us sort of caught by surprise because we have been listening to the current government when they were opposition around how current cybercrime law, which is Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, and the cybercrime under FIA wasn't really performing well or unable to deal with the challenges around cybercrime or harassment or disinformation information. And we had a lot of sort of like back and forth conversation with so lots of people, including Tarar Saab and our IT minister, when they were in the opposition, that we, identifying gaps, that what are the things that are not working, what are the gaps in the law, in the current laws, Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, and back and forth when we saw different, drafts of rules and, attempts of increasing sort of, digital repression. We had those conversations with them. And I think it was surprising for us in terms of that they didn't consult with any of us. I'm in touch with lots of digital rights activists and organizations, and we just received this news that there's this new agency and the rules are being introduced and the new agency will work. And I think it's I don't know how this new agency will work when a lot of conversation have happened in the past that in terms of how cybercrime wing is not performing well, what are the gaps, what are the issues around resources, enforcement around the law. So definitely we are surprised, but I really hope that this is just the first step they have taken, and they have some plans.
In fact,
there's
Nigot, there's plenty to be surprised of, because as we know, when PICA laws, Prevention of Electronic Crimes, those laws were promulgated, there were a lot of objections to what went into that legislation. And since then, we've seen how those laws have been used and abused for political purposes, for picking up journalists, for so many other things. So clearly, there is a concern about how the digital arena is being monitored or handled by the government, of course, and then we've seen what's happened with the restrictions on X. So now, Zarar, do you think that this is something that, clearly we know that there was no consultation, so there is a surprise. But do you think these fears are genuine? These fears are genuine that such an authority could be used for further clamping down? And why I say that, let me just add one rider, Zarar, for you. See, whoever you speak to, when you say, does digital media, social media require regulation, 99% would say yes, because we've seen how the digital space is used for harassment, for bullying, for fake news. So all of this is there. The need for regulation is there, but if you're creating something like this, does it raise more concerns than some comfort?
Yes. Look, it's actually like it's a study. It's quite beautiful, the way that the need for these laws is framed. And every time a law like this comes in, there is always the same line of argument. Well, if you're against this, then you must support fake news. If you're against this, then does this mean you support harassment? Do you support pornography, child pornography? It was the same arguments in PICA, man. It was the same arguments when PICA was tightened, and it's the same arguments now. The script stays the same, and it's not just Pakistan. Anytime that a government wants to push through a law that they've always wanted to push through, they just need an incentive or a window of timing. Take the Patriot Act in the United States. What was the debate then? Oh, you oppose the Patriot Act? Then that must mean that you're a traitor and a terrorist, right? Even right now in the United States, I'm just going to give this example and then move on back to Pakistan. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, now everybody agrees that hate speech isn't good, but we also know that this is basically to provide cover for Israel, but it's couched in very different terminology, right? So it's the same in Pakistan. Earlier, in your introduction, you posed a question that, is there a need for such an agency? I will say absolutely yes, there's a need for such an agency, because there is always a need for control. And that is what it all comes down to. I just heard Nigat talking about, how she had consultations with these very same politicians who are now pushing for it. And Atta Tarar, he's like, oh yes, the government will be creating an authority to safeguard digital rights. Now, when they're in the opposition, they always have a different tune, right? And I've always been of the opinion that all politicians should permanently be in the opposition, because when they're in the opposition, they're lovely people, they love free expression and they love freedom, and they're at every single cause, they're like supporting every single cause. And when you go into government, things tend to change. I don't know, maybe it's the furniture, maybe it's, whatever gas they pump into the air conditioning over there. But your priorities change and you sort of change with them. As far as, the government, what greater farce can there be, I put it to you, Fahad, that Twitter has been blocked since February 13th, 12th, I don't know, somewhere around that. Yet, every single government official, from the Prime Minister down to, say, the DC, Nowshera, is on Twitter. Right? Using VPNs. The government of Pakistan's official account is tweeting in violation of the government of Pakistan's, purportedly the government of Pakistan.
Zara, these are the
Twitter ban.
These are the glorious,
when you're dealing with
glorious contradictions of Pakistani decision making.
When you're dealing with a farce of nature, then really, what are we talking about?
Okay.
So, and as far as this authority goes, it's duplication of resources. It's duplication of.
So if we were to. So Nigat, we have to take a quick break, but I'll place the context now for our the next aspect of our debate. The point is that we do need regulation. You would also agree that we need some regulation which protects people from harassment and bullying and all the other things that happen within the digital sphere. But that regulation has to be very carefully done. It has to be very thoroughly debated so that all the key stakeholders are on board. Now, this new agency, we don't know the details of what exactly it will do. What are some of the red flags that we should be looking for, and what should the government ideally be doing at this stage now that it has already announced the formation of this agency?
Fahad, so definitely there has always been a need of regulation, but regulation that sort of protects people and their rights in the online space, as Tara Saab said, protection of digital rights. So if the intention is real and it's there is a political will and they really want to do it, I think they should present a feasibility report to the stakeholders that what gaps they have seen in all these years when PICA was enacted and when cybercrime wing of FIA started working and enforcing PICA. So stakeholders, journalists, civil society organizations have been indicating different gaps and how things are not working and how law has been weaponized by different actors. We don't have anything in front of us. So what exactly what was the plan? What process has gone into creating this new agency is itself a big red flag, right? And I basically worry that all these years we have been saying that cybercrime wing maybe, and to be honest, I'm somebody who always try to, because we have a cyber harassment helpline, we work with victims and survivors, women victims and survivors who actually many of the cases we have dealt with have committed suicide because of intimate images and blackmailing.
I think
cyber.
That's a good point. Nigat. I have to take a quick break. We continuing with this discussion. When we come back after the break, one of my colleagues is also going to join us, and we'll see whether there will be any pushback from stakeholders on this agency, or whether this is a reality and we just have to work with it. Let's take a quick break and come back to discuss more of this topic. Welcome back after the break. We are talking about the new digital agency, National Cyber Crimes Investigation Agency, which has been formed by the government without any consultation with the key stakeholders. I'm joined by Zarar Khoro and Nigat Dad, and now also joining the discussion is my colleague Mohammad Malik. Malik Saab, welcome to the show. So, how bad is this? Are you concerned? Are you seeing red flags? Or is it something that the stakeholders, including the media, can actually work with?
Yeah, it's all red, Fahad. It's all red. The way it has been brought in, There are too many questions about it. And there's a very fine line between silencing dissent or crushing even unfavorable views and stuff like that. First of all, I'm sure these guys must have pointed it out. We talk about reducing the size of government. We are now further expanding it. We don't have money to pay salaries. We're setting up a whole new wing. We don't know how much it's going to cost. Where the staff are going to be paid. And when you saw the little bit that was in the press the other day, so many deputy directors, sub-directors, assistant directors. There's a whole new structure coming up. They should have beefed up the existing facilities, FIA or whoever. Anyway, then look at the backdrop. A few days back, the chief of the army staff spoke very strongly about social media at the passing of parade of the cadets of Air Force. That also sets a context to it. Now, I have a simple question. Let's say tomorrow the Chief Justice of Pakistan says something weird or funny in a court, and somebody makes a meme out of it, which might actually be funny. Does that constitute harassment or insulting judiciary or defaming judiciary? I don't think so. So I think in things like that, the reason you have a discussion is there's no two arguments that it's a Wild West, something needs to be done.
Malik Saab, then to somebody like Zarar Khoro is in serious trouble. If you're talking about making, light of things, he's going to make a joke and he's going to be in serious trouble. I mean,
no, I'm going to be perfectly safe. I'm perfectly safe. I only go after Zionists these days.
Okay. Let's just hear out Malik Saab. Ji Malik Saab.
Zarar better think about moving abroad or something. No, I think the biggest check on social media and all is societal behavior and societal sanctions, not some grade 18 officer sitting somewhere and deciding things. The debate is now, what are going to be the red lines? Where do we draw the line? I mean, just on saying, why things are going crazy on social media. Yes, it is. You and I suffer. We all suffer in social media every day. But the point is, where do you draw the line? The way this thing is being come forward, it's too secretive. It's absolutely an executive thing. And when an executive does something in a silo, it's going to be abused, it's going to be misused. So I have no doubt about it.
So if I just pick it up from there, Zarar, what Malik Saab is saying, and which is a genuine concern, we don't know what the red lines are. So what should the government do now, or what should stakeholders try and get the government to do if we want to ensure that this new agency is not abused and misused?
Okay, so first of all, it will be misused. These kind of agencies are always misused. I mean, come on. You talk about red flags. It's like communist China. It's the Cultural Revolution here, man. It's red flags as far as the eye can see, and always have been. Look, the ultimate litmus test of any legislation, of any agency is it there to protect the people, or is it there to protect the people in power? And the answer is almost always the latter.
Well said.
Now, when we talk about stakeholders, let's break that down. Who do we mean? Do we mean us? Do we mean the people of Pakistan? Do we mean the rights agency groups, like Digital Rights Foundation and so on and so forth? Who really cares about them? This law, this agency, I mean, we already know, you already established, it's been formed without consultation. Peak hours with consultation, what good did that do? Look, ultimately, it's about selective enforcement. It's not about need for another agency. You have enough agencies, yeah? Okay, and you have enough laws, you have enough, you have defamation, you have laws against libel.
Okay, so
this is.
And because we're running out of time, I quickly want to bring in Nigat. So Nigat, if all those people who are behind the formation of this new agency, if they are listening to you right now, what would you advise them? What should they do now that they've actually gone ahead and formed this agency without consulting people like yourself?
Change the way they live instead of changing the
First of all, I really hope that they are listening to me. But if they are listening, I hope that they whatever they are doing, stop this now and speak to the concerned people and stakeholders, because they all of us have so much information and knowledge of all these years that we can actually fill the gap in terms of why. First of all, why there was a need of new agency, what was not working and what is working. I think think these are the conversations that we really need to have. But at the same time, Fahad, we are a country not in isolation. Like, we call ourselves a democracy, right? And if we are democracy, we have signed international covenants and treaties, ICCPR and all those things. So there is like international human rights framework or other things that best practices other countries follow. We really need to look into that. But if we are talking about protections, let's just do something around protections as well, and not something in isolation people don't even know.
Fair point. Last 1 minute, Malik Saab, what would you advise the government? What should they do now?
It's not about helping out anyone. It's about absolute control. And the government should know, no matter what you do with technology is like water. It will always find a way around censors. So change the way you're behaving instead of changing us and changing the laws.
Okay. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us today. It's an important issue which needs to be resolved very quickly. Last couple of points before I sign off. The issue of digital rights is a major one. We are living in an age where digital is increasingly defining not just our workplace, but also our lives and how we organize ourselves as a society. It is a reality. And those people who are still thinking in analog terms really need to understand, recognize, acknowledge the fact that we have entered a bold, brave new world. And there is no way that we can overcome the challenges of the digital age with methods and tactics and actions that belong to the analog age. I hope better sense prevails. That's it for today. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.